Oh, hold on, let me go live here. Okay, so we're live on YouTube. We're live on Instagram. This is fun. This is gonna be exciting. We're gonna be talking about high blood pressure. I got a few people I got to call after this. Um, for potential folks who want to work together. If you do want to work with me, use the link in bio on my link tree on Instagram. You could put in something there, and I could get in touch with you, or shoot me a DM on Instagram, and I'd be more than happy to give you more details and talk with you on the phone. So there's that. Okay, with that out of the way, also if you want to get some Herbal Infusions hot sauce, this is more for YouTube because I just talked about this on Instagram. Go to herbalinfusionskitchen.com. You can use the code hot sauce party 69, which is kind of like an inside joke from an Instagram live we did last night with the Street MD, with Dr. Julia Britz, and with Danny. So yeah, that code's up for now, 15% off. Hope you give it a shot. I think it's delicious. Of course, I'm biased, but you should give it a shot yourself. Okay. We're going to be talking about high blood pressure today. Now, high blood pressure is super common. It is called the silent killer. The silent killer, high blood pressure, even though the cause is pretty much unknown. But we just know we have to take, certain medications to lower it. But what we're going to talk about today is what some of the actual causes might be, and what is going to actually play a role in fixing it. So that's kind of where we're at. But it starts, and I'm going to say this multiple times, so I'm going to say this to start, is high blood pressure is a reaction to a stimulus at the end of the day. It is something that happens when a physical, chemical, or emotional stress is put on the body. You're going to increase your blood pressure to go into that sympathetic state, that fight or flight state, to get blood pumping to all different parts of the body. That is going to raise blood pressure, take blood away from the digestive tract, away from repair, away from digestion, and to the muscles to get moving. But let's take a step back and let's talk about blood a little bit. So blood, we know blood, it helps supply oxygen to the tissues, but it also supplies things like glucose and amino acids and fatty acids. It helps us remove waste products like carbon dioxide and urea through the kidneys. And that blood, remember, has to get filtered through the kidneys and things like lactic acid. Blood also contains, remember, it's not just red blood cells, it's white blood cells too. Those are really helpful for detecting, any foreign material that's going on, and mounting a response to eventually fix it. So whether that's Th1, Th2, again, we tend to be in a more Th2 dominant state, but that's a conversation for another day. It helps with clotting, which you need to do. If you cut yourself, you do want to create, a blood clot to stop the bleeding. So coagulation is important. It helps transport hormones. It helps regulate the body pH, and it helps regulate our body temperature since we are warm-blooded folks. Now, normally, if you're looking at blood should be pretty free-flowing. It shouldn't be sticky. It should be able to go through arteries and veins pretty readily. But what you'll notice in a stress state, and again, if you have a physical, chemical, or emotional stress, you'll notice if you look at these under like an electron microscope, you'll see that blood cells start sticking together. They get sticky. They'll start clumping together. And this is where it could potentially start becoming an issue with clotting. So in some ways, clotting is going to be a direct result of stress, or one of the direct results from stress. So if it starts getting sticky, there's the potential to form an embolism, and then and eventually a clot, which is not necessarily good. And this is going to be dictated by the health of our blood. So it's really important to kind of keep that in mind. And it also is going to go back to our nervous system. So remember, when we're talking about blood pressure, there's multiple different mechanisms for it. And it's important to understand the different parts of the body that all play a role. And you have to remember, this functions as a system. You can't just look at one thing and be like, oh, it's high blood pressure. Because remember, we have a nervous system that's broken down into a parasympathetic and sympathetic. The parasympathetic is mostly located in the cranial region and in the sacrum, and that's going to really be repairing and digestion. Those are the two main functions. That's rest and digest. The sympathetic is going to be more your fight or flight. It's going to, but they can't be active at the same time. So if one is more in control, the other has to be downshifted, and vice versa. So, and this is important to understand because we live in a constant state where stress is thrown at us all the time. So if we're constantly in this fight or flight state, this is going to start with the hypothalamus, go down to the pituitary, and then from there it's gonna send signals to different organs like the adrenals, for example, that create cortisol and stress hormones. And when this happens, this is going to raise blood sugar and make blood eventually more sticky if it's constantly high. See, we should be able to shift in and out of parasympathetic and sympathetic when we need it. But if we're constantly in that sympathetic state, it's going to cause an issue. Blood's going to get sticky. That's going to raise blood pressure. So if we have a stress that's always on the body, it's going to cause high blood pressure. So important to kind of understand that. And this is where something like heart rate variability is really important. So heart rate variability, so if you don't know, um, we all have a heartbeat, but it's not necessarily always consistent, right? It's not always, they're not all the same amount of time apart from each other. There is some variation to it. And actually, a higher heart rate variability is usually indicative of a better functioning nervous system. So, and it's a sign, a marker for how well we're able to shift in and out of sympathetic, parasympathetic nervous systems. So, if it's shorter, if the times between the beats are more consistent, if there's less variability, it actually means you're in more of a sympathetic dominant state. So, pretty important to kind of like keep that in mind, when you go into it. So when we're talking about blood pressure, I'm sure we've all heard it at some point. Blood pressure is going to be, normal, or what we call normal is 120 over 80. Pre-hypertension is going to be somewhere between 120 and 140, over 80 to 90. And then hypertension is over that, over 140 over 90. What's interesting, though, is that these numbers have changed over the years. So every 10 years or so, they'll get together and discuss different things when it comes to hypertension. Actually, these numbers have changed over the years. So, it's not just about 120 over 80. It's about what's really going on and understanding the mechanisms behind it. Um, and it's really kind of important to understand that. So, what we tend to find is that there are some issues with A, taking blood pressure, but B, how consistent is it? So again, if we're looking at a study from the Journal of the American Medical Association back in 2006, they found that heart failure patients with high systolic blood pressures had lower death rates, which is interesting. Mortality rates were more than 4 times higher for those with systolic pressures of less than 120 in comparison to those who had pressure over 161. These conclusions were gleaned from research on more than 48,000 heart failure patients seen at almost 260 hospitals in the US. This is between 2003 and 4. So what does this mean? It means if we're just going to throw a drug at high blood pressure and not affect or address what's causing the high blood pressure in the first place, and not addressing whatever that physical, chemical, emotional stress is, it's not going to make much of a difference when we're talking about outcomes down the road. Now, a lot of things can affect blood pressure readings. The time of day can, whether you have to go to the bathroom can, whether you've been walking, whether you're sitting, whether you're standing, whether you're supine. All of these things are going to change or can influence blood pressure. So, and if you've ever gotten it done, the correct way to do it is to sit in a chair with your arms with your arm at the level of your heart. So I'm sitting with my arms in a chair here. This is actually too low. You would want your arm lifted up to the level of my heart. That's actually the way you would do it. You'd want to make sure you're hydrated and make sure your bladder's empty. And then you would have to be breathing diaphragmatically for at least 10 minutes, essentially at rest with your arm like this, about 10 minutes before taking the measurement. Now, you'll notice that's not necessarily how measurements are taken in the very majority of doctors' offices. So, and it's also important to know that blood pressure can change as we age. So, that's also like kind of important. Where is that taken into account if everyone has to be, 120 over 80? And there are a bunch of different factors that can play a role with this, right? So we're talking about things like environment, like oxidative stress, which is a lack of antioxidants, essentially. Is there inflammation? Is there some sort of vascular dysfunction? Or, which is a big thing, and we're going to get into this in a little bit, is drug induced nutrient depletion. So, what you're going to notice is a lot of these medications actually lower a lot of the nutrients that would actually regulate blood pressure, which is kind of crazy. So, things like what we do know is like oxidative stress. So that's going to be if you do have oxidative stress, that's essentially a low antioxidant count. We do know that those with low levels of vitamin C tend to be under more oxidative stress, and if this is persistent for a long period of time, that's going to affect our heart function. It leaves us more open to potentially developing plaques because we don't have the antioxidants to break them down, and that's going to increase blood pressure. And listen, you do not need to be an engineer or understand a ton of physics to say, hey, if I have a tube and I put something in there that's going to block half of it, is the pressure going to go up or down? So, and this is going to be same thing with, again, kidneys. If, blood is starting to clot and it's blocking off one of the nephrons, is the blood pressure going to go up or down around it? So again, is it something going on with the kidneys? Is it something going on with the nervous system? Is it something else going on in the blood, or is there atherosclerosis? Just throwing a blood pressure medication to change a number is not fixing any of those things. And it's really important to understand that if you're looking to get to the root cause. If there's inflammation, you could get high sensitivity C reactive protein. That's a lab test that you can do. If that tends to be high, that can mean that there's something going on and it's worth looking into. Certain environmental things are huge. Heavy metals like cadmium, like lead, if we're exposed to these things, they can raise blood pressure. That's going to put a stress on the body. And again, this is where you're going to need things like zinc or vitamin C or other nutrients to either detox them out. Maybe you need to bind those heavy metals and get rid of them, or do some liver support. So all of this stuff is important and kind of playing a role. Arsenic, mercury, all of this stuff can do it. Are there those type of fillings there? How we breathe is going to play a role. So if you are a mouth breather, that you're not getting the benefits of nitric oxide that we make in the nose. So nasally breathing, and you could check out the course if you go on my link tree, the Breathe Easy course. This can help with this. Your nose secretes and makes nitric oxide. So diaphragmatically breathing, nasally breathing is going to dilate the blood vessels, dilate the pathways of the lungs to help oxygenate tissue. And that's going to help lower blood pressure, increase oxygen absorption. It's going to help because nitric oxide has antibacterial, antiviral properties. It can potentially keep it a cleaner environment, keep that microbiome clean, help keep that clean, and help maintain and optimize our immune system. The nose, all those little hairs in the nose, they act essentially as a filter too for particles. So getting that taken care of, and starting to nasally breathe if you have an issue with this, if your kids are mouth breathing, that is going to affect their facial development. So doing this sooner than later is helpful, and even as an adult, this stuff can make a huge difference. You have to know what the cause is or what the potential things are that are causing blood pressure to be high, because high blood pressure is not a disease, it's a reaction to a stimulus. Have to remember that as we go along. So, what are the main, medications before we get into this, because this is important? They're going to be things like calcium channel blockers, they're going to be beta androgenic blockers, they're going to be ACE inhibitors, they're going to be diuretics, they're going to be statins, cholesterol drugs. So calcium blockers, we know calcium channel blockers. Again, 2010. These are widely used. They could increase the potential for heart failure. Again, not surprised, considering what we're talking about. If you're ignoring the root cause and just treating a number, as in blood pressure, and ignoring why it's high, this could lead to potential issues. Beta blockers. So we know that these could potentially lead to early death from heart disease, cancer, diabetes. Why? Because if again, if the body is being forced to go through life with less oxygen, then you're going to start aging. You're not oxygenating your body the way you need. It's going to lead to premature aging, and that's going to potentially lead to earlier death from a lot of these major killers. So that's beta blockers. These are ACE inhibitors. If they're, again, lowering it, but at the same time lowering the oxygen distribution to all different parts of the body, including the brain and muscles and organs, that's going to be quite an issue. Um, you know, Diuretics. So, it's some of this stuff. Again, these tend to have higher mortality rates, and one of the reasons this is thought is because it could lead to ventricular fibrillation. So remember, your heart has four chambers. It has two atriums or atria and two ventricles. If the ventricles are not firing properly, this could be due to a potassium deficiency. A lot of these medications that I'm talking about actually deplete potassium, which you need because it's an essential electrolyte. You need things like sodium and potassium for nerves to fire correctly, for muscles to fire correctly. And we know the heart is a pretty important muscle. There are some studies, back in 2015, in Science Daily, scientists found the risk of stroke went up by a third for each blood pressure medication taken. So again, if we're not addressing the root cause, we're lowering a number, but you're going to see all these studies like, oh, hey, well, we lowered this, but premature death is happening, or you're going to have other complications that kind of go along with it. It's really important to understand that. So, and we have to understand, if we're going to talk about genetics, you have to talk about epigenetics too, because genes can be turned on and off. And that's done through epigenetics. Can we flip them on or flip them off? And everything we expose ourselves to in our environment is going to play a role with that. So different drugs like the ones we talked about, like, the statins or beta blockers, or NSAIDs, or antibiotics, all of these things create different environments, and they're going to lead to rises of things, especially if you're taking them long term, to things like heart disease, cancer, obesity, diabetes, different types of nerve or neurological disorders, mental disorders, um, sexual dysfunction, infertility. Like, these are important things to kind of understand. And we have to remember, and I always find this funny, like with chiropractors, because you'll have folks out there like, oh, I don't want to be adjusted, it's dangerous. Like it's literally like a 1 in a million chance there's a negative effect. And usually if that happens, it's not a chiropractor doing it, or it's someone who took like a manipulation course on a weekend, who didn't have the training, and they're doing things in really far extension, um, where you kind of expose yourself a little bit more. Whereas we always overlook that the medical field, again, in the right drug at the right time at the right dosage, is killing almost 200,000 people a year, and we don't even blink an eye. So yeah, you have to put these things into context in terms of where we're going, and where we go from here with this stuff, because It's we have to be able to take control of our health back, and if we don't do it, giving up that responsibility and giving up that freedom, it is going to be kind of one of the worst things that you can do, because the body is self-regulating and self-healing, and particularly when it goes to blood pressure, it's just a sign. It's like it's almost like the check engine light. And if you're taking these things and ignoring the consequences or the potential side effects, you're essentially just putting a piece of tape over the dashboard, and it could potentially lead to further issues down the road. Now let's get back to cholesterol in the liver, because this is really important too. So cholesterol is kind of important. It is the precursor to all the glucocorticosteroids, mineralocorticosteroids, sex hormones we have in our body. So kind of important. It also by weight makes up half of our brain in weight. So these things are kind of important. So you need these things to help make up memories, to help create hormones. If cholesterol levels drop too low, you're going to have receptors that don't work. Things like serotonin that's going to affect your mood. Now we're in a world now where cholesterol will talk about cholesterol, and it'll be like, oh, it's the form of plaque and it's an issue, and then it's going to lead to atherosclerosis. And again, as you plug up a tube, that's going to increase the pressure of everything going in it. And what we forget is, with atherosclerosis, cholesterol usually isn't the issue, because you have to remember cholesterol actually has antioxidant properties. And again, if it's high, that means there's an inflammatory response going on. Um, and again, if we're going to look, um, different study, role of oxidative modifications in atherosclerosis, inflammation needs to be considered as a primary process of atherosclerosis. And oxidative stress is a secondary event. LDL particles are oxidized free radicals. So, and interestingly, all polyunsaturated oils provide a free source of free radicals, which can damage arterial walls, which initiate plaque building processes. Vegetable oils constrict blood vessels and increase platelet stickiness, which raises blood pressure and can further cause damage. So, again, is it really cholesterol that's the issue? Or is there some sort of inflammatory process? Is it inflammatory foods? Is it a lack of antioxidants that is causing these free radicals to get oxidized and eventually to be deposited as plaques? So the sooner we kind of get to that idea and understand this. So even British Medical Journal in 1992, that was the year I was born. There was they ran a study. The objective was to see if the claim that lowering cholesterol values prevents coronary heart disease is true, or if it's based on citation of supportive trials only. And what they found was lowering serum cholesterol level concentration, or lowering serum cholesterol concentration, does not reduce mortality and is unlikely to prevent coronary heart disease. Claims of the opposite are based on preferential citation in supportive trials. Whoa. So, if we're taking a cholesterol lowering drug, and we're missing the bigger picture here. Cholesterol only gets high if there's something inflammatory going on to make it happen. You're going to make cholesterol either in the liver. Is something going on in the liver? Is there something inflammatory going on to spurn the creation of cholesterol? It's not necessarily causing the problem with this. But taking a medication just to lower it and assuming it does is missing the bigger issue as far as what's going on. Statins. I mean, the statins are not going to help with this. They are associated with decreased myocardial function. They are associated with an increased prevalence and extent of coronary plaques possessing calcium plaques in the arteries. So again, just trying to take something to affect it is not going to help. So there was a study done on 500,000 residents in Denmark. They found that people who took statins were more likely to develop polyneuropathy, so that's nerve pain. And taking statins for 1 year raised the risk of nerve damage by about 15%. And those who took it for 2 years or 2+ years, 26%. So you're talking muscle weakness, you're causing nerve pain, nerve weakness. All of these potential things can happen from taking statins for long term. So, what does this all mean at the end of the day? Where do we go? What are the solutions here? So, first, I want to talk about some of the nutrients that are going to play a role, and then we'll get into it. The first obvious ones are going to be some of the ones that are depleted by these medications, like magnesium, like potassium. These are going to help either dilate arteries and blood vessels in general and help improve heart function. Both of these are huge. So potassium, we know, is a vasodilator. It really needs to be in balance with sodium. So we've talked about sodium before. There's a lot of stuff on sodium diets. Oh, we need to stop having salt. Really, we need to have a balance between it and not eat processed salt. The majority of our salt intake, especially nowadays, comes from processed foods or prepackaged foods or eating at restaurants, prepared foods. So if we actually just took the time to make our own food at home and use the salt we wanted, we would likely cut our salt intake by at least half. And I'm talking about Americans. So important to keep that in mind. So potassium-rich foods, absolutely vital. Absolutely, absolutely vital. Magnesium, we know, is a natural diuretic. We know is a calcium channel blocker, and we know is a vasodilator. Now, somewhere, depending on where you look, 60 and 82-ish% of Americans are deficient in magnesium. So magnesium-rich foods are huge. You got to look at leafy greens. You got to look at lentils, chickpeas, legumes of all kinds. These are your magnesium-rich foods, nuts, seeds. Going to be absolutely, absolutely vital when you're talking about heart health, when you're talking about hypertension. Zinc. Zinc is crucial. So we know low zinc levels are associated with hypertension, likely because zinc has many antioxidant properties, helps with liver function, is going to help with cholesterol, and could potentially help mitigate or reverse some of the plaque damage. There is CoQ10. We know a lot of these hypertensive medications, they are going to deplete CoQ10. So getting CoQ10 from different foods is going to be really important. Herbs that are really good, that can help. Things like hawthorn berry, really, really helpful. Similar mechanisms to things like ACE inhibitors and beta blockers, but they don't have the negative aspects, and they help smooth, reduce vascular tone, dilate them a little bit to help reduce it. It's working with the body, working with nature. Really, really important stuff. Garlic, we know, is huge. It helps increase nitric oxide production. So really, really important. Also has similar mechanisms to things like ACE inhibitors and calcium channel blockers, but again, do not have the side effects. Garlic is huge. I cook with garlic pretty much every single day. Using garlic is huge. Balancing omega-3, omega-6 fatty acid ratio. I talk about this all the time. If you're plant-based or variety or largely plant-based, things like algae, really good. Ahi flour is really good. So seaweeds are really good. Flax, chia, walnuts, all these are awesome options. Vitamin D, we know, is associated with hypertension too. So getting outside in the sun, like, this stuff is so simple and so easy. It can't be that easy, but it really, really is. Certain B vitamins, like vitamin B6. So if that's low, this can help reduce homocysteine. It can help reduce hypertension. Really, really useful stuff. Exercise. Oh my God. Like, simply just exercising and going out of that sympathetic parasympathetic state, it's going to help prevent plaques and induce the regression of stenosis. In other words, actually help break up those plaques, which is going to decrease blood pressure. I mean, Other things like blood pressure, as far as we're talking about cardiovascular, increases angiogenesis, which is the building of blood vessels, neurogenesis, the building of new nerve tissue, uh, um, synthesis of neurotransmitters. Like this stuff is that simple. It really is. If we just kind of got into it, grounding, like getting yourself in touch with negative ions from the earth, putting your bare feet on the sand, on the grass. This is going to help reduce your stress level. And again, physical, chemical, emotional could be any or a combination of all three. That's going to help do it. Simply going for a walk in nature, putting your feet in the dirt, in the grass, in the sand is going to help. Fruits and veggies, like in general, are going to be huge. This is the amount of like research on this is beyond overwhelming. Please, like plant-based is going to help. You don't need to be vegan, like, but you need to start honoring this stuff and including a lot of this stuff because it is easily going to be the biggest thing that can reduce this, I think, in my opinion, along with exercise. So that's going to be a huge, huge part of this here. Lowers risk of all cause mortality and especially cardiovascular risk. So huge. Garlic we talked about, celery, carrots, water-rich foods, mineral-rich foods, vitamin C, citrus, kiwi, guava, peppers, broccoli. All like there's so many. Like have some fun with this and get into it. So berries, antioxidant rich. We talked about that. These plaques are forming because the free radicals are causing damage. If we have the antioxidants to do it with berries, with different nuts and seeds, with things like beans that are all antioxidant rich powerhouses, these are going to be huge. Nuts, we know, reduce the risk of cardiovascular disease. It's that easy. It's a response to a physical, chemical, emotional stress at the end of the day. The question is for each person, what is that stress or what are the dominant stressors that are causing it? And then going from there. It's that straightforward. Um, that's what I got for today. If you want to address this stuff in more detail, feel free to work with me. You can get in touch with me on my LinkedIn. Feel free to fill out the form on my website. I am more than happy to get in touch with you and chat further and work with you on this because this stuff is reversible and fixable for sure. Get in touch with there. You could check out the hot sauce, like I said, on herbalinfusionskitchen.com. You get in touch with me on my website, on my contact form, insideouthealthwellness.com, or shoot me an email, drvincennesposito@gmail.com, or on Instagram at Dr. Vincent Esposito, Dr. Vincent Esposito. Have a good one, guys. I'll see you guys next week. Holy moly.